So welcome back, friends. It is, Friday morning at 9:30. I'm getting ready to head over to my friend Eric. We're going to finish up that sawmilling with the Lucas mill for all of those logs that we had down. So had a little bit of time. The drive is 45 minutes or so, and I wanted to share with you a story that several of you have continued to remind me that I promised I would share with you about my crazy friend, or not crazy, but a very eccentric friend, Charlie, growing up. So I grew up in a really tight-knit community, tight-knit church, and Charlie was a member there. He was actually several years older than me, and he was a very interesting character. So he was a bachelor. He'd never been married, and in his younger days, he was incredibly fit. He started working for the Forest Service back in the day when they used to log the national forests, and he had a job that was called, don't mean to offend anyone, but the title he had, it was called a pack ass. And what a pack ass did was a pack ass would carry on an old government, like a World War II pack board, the old plywood pack boards, would carry 5-gallon cans of gas and bar oil out to the loggers in extreme remote areas. So if you're familiar with the Pacific Northwest and the Cascade Range, I mean, it is a very rugged, very mountainous area. And this is what he did for a full-time job. So you can imagine what type of shape he was in. Kind of like when we used to elk hunt over there, we would go over there and there were these guys that were sheep herders. They were Basque or Basco, I don't know, maybe that's a derogatory term. But they would, the ranchers would bring them over, and they would actually live out and tend the sheep, protect them from coyotes and predators and such. And they would walk all day long up and down these in Hell's Canyon, which is up in the northeast corner of Oregon, which is actually a deeper canyon than the Grand Canyon. That's where we used to elk hunt as well. You'd see these guys, and I mean, their legs, they were like tree trunks and big barrel-chested. You know, they were just specimens of endurance. But so Charlie was kind of like that. So Charlie would, his thing was, he was like the original endurance athlete. I mean, he would take off on his days off, and if packing those gas cans wasn't enough, after work, he would go and try to climb the highest peak. You know, he would do 20 miles at night, you know, and be out all night with a flashlight. You know, it was just incredible. So, unfortunately, he had an accident with his second job, and he was working as a lineman, repairing power lines, telephone poles and stuff. And I don't remember all the details, but I think he had some sort of an accident where he fell out of the pole and completely destroyed his hip. So when I knew Charlie, he could barely get around. His hip and everything on his right side, I believe, was completely locked up. It was a struggle for him to move. And I remember it didn't stop him at all. Another thing about Charlie that was interesting is that he was so fit that he would chase down herds of elk to exhaustion. And I didn't know this was possible, and I didn't believe him until I saw it and heard about it later from other people that actually have to be there. But apparently, an elk, or many animals, elk and deer, they can run really fast for a short distance, but they don't have the endurance of a man. And if you're reasonably fit, if you can keep them in sight, if you can keep at them, and this is what he would do, and you can wear them down to the point where they are so exhausted that they'll just stand there and you can walk up on them and pet them. I mean, it's hard to even imagine. He would do these sorts of things. So I'll just tell you the story about Charlie in the cave. So Charlie, of course, you know, every weekend he would take his Jeep and he would go out and do some extreme exploration, and he would never usually tell anyone about it and go. And so he all of a sudden he took off for the weekend, and Monday morning came around and he didn't show up for work. And then Tuesday, and nobody had heard from him, and everyone was starting to worry about Charlie and what had happened to him. Well, what Charlie had done, and this is after he was crippled, he had decided to go explore this cave and to go in really deep. And so he went in the cave and with his flashlight and got in there and got in there quite some ways, apparently, fell down, broke his flashlight, and was completely in the dark. Charlie didn't always have the best sense, and wasn't always the best prepared. And so there he was, and he had made several turns, and he had told me later that there were several pretty steep precipices, and it was impossible for Charlie to get out of the cave without a flashlight. So there he was. So he was in there for 1 day. He was in there for 2 days. He was in there for 3 days. No food, nothing, no blanket, no coat. And if you know anything about ice caves and volcanic caves out here, they are cold. Charlie told me that the only way he could tell if it was day or night was in the daytime, the ice would start melting a little bit and he could hear the dripping. And then at night, of course, it would freeze up solid. Charlie also told me that he had bought a brand new pair of boots, a brand new pair of Red Wings that he had worn the first time for that trip. And he wore those boots out because the only way he had to stay warm inside this cave was to jump up and down and clap his hands. He did that for so many hours that he actually completely wore through the soles and wore the boots out in 3 days trying to stay warm, jumping around on that sharp volcanic rock. So it's the end of day 3, and Charlie is having a fitful sleep, and he wakes up. He said it's the most terrifying thing that had ever happened to him. He woke up, and there was a wild animal. He could feel the wet nose and it's sniffing on Charlie's face. He jumped up, thought it was a bear, didn't know what it was, and what it was the search and rescue dog that they had sent in. So fortunately, Charlie had parked his Jeep outside the mouth of this cave. Somebody had spotted it, called search and rescue, and on the 4th day had went in and saved Charlie. So it was kind of a funny story, and it's probably not as good as me telling it. He was a pretty good storyteller. But I'll just tell you one other thing. One time he decided to take us all camping, a bunch of young guys. We must have been 16, 17, 18, the prime of your life. And so we do this long trip. I mean, it was exhausting. We packed in like 10 miles and, heavy packs. This was way before things were really sophisticated and lightweight gear. And when Charlie pulled his pack out, and I kid you not, I tried to shoulder it. It was the biggest pack I'd ever seen. Charlie wasn't a big guy, but I'll bet that pack was 16, 18 inches over the top of his head. And it had to weigh in excess of 80 pounds. I'm guessing between 80 and 90 pounds. And here he is crippled, hobbling along. So it was like the tortoise and the hare. We would take off and go and sit down and panting, kind of racing with each other. And here would come Charlie, limping along with that 85, 90 pound monstrous pack. We get to our destination. We're absolutely spent, and everyone's sprawled out by the lake. Charlie throws his pack off, puts on a lighter pack, and disappears. Of course, dinner comes, no Charlie, no one's around. It's 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, everyone's got their tents up, thinking about going to bed, no one's around. No Charlie. Okay, so do we go look for Charlie? What do we do? Well, Charlie's an experienced guy, we'll just go to bed. I hear him at 3 o'clock in the morning, I hear this something going on, a ruckus outside. I get out of my sleeping bag. Here comes Charlie, and he's got a little flat rock with a little tiny candle. I mean, there's not much left of it, maybe quarter of an inch, and it's burning on this a candle on a rock. So what had happened is Charlie had decided to go on, and he went and he did about a 20 miler up to this peak that was so far up there you couldn't see it. You could see it had a little tower on it. He hiked all the way up there, and to prove it, he brought back a little rock in it with the paint of the Forest Service lookout station on there that he, when they paint, they're kind of sloppy with those things, that he had grabbed it to prove that he had been up there and gotten that. Halfway back, he'd fallen down again. I mean, he really had a hard time getting around with that bad hip. Broke his flashlight, couldn't see, but he had learned something from this cave experience. I guess he didn't learn that he maybe should carry a second flashlight, but he carried a candle, and the candle got so short he couldn't carry it anymore, and it was burning his finger, so he'd put it on this flat rock, and there he'd come in at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning with that flashlight. So he was quite an interesting guy. I think he's long since passed away. I lost touch with him years ago, but that's the story of Charlie in the cave.